In the spring of 1943, a small fishing boat off the coast of Brazil came across something that made absolutely no sense. About 9 miles from shore, bobbing on a crude wooden raft in the middle of the Atlantic, was a Chinese man, thin as a rail, burned almost beyond recognition, who was singing. Not crying for help, not barely clinging to life. Singing. The fishermen pulled him aboard, fed him, and tried to communicate. It took days and a translator to finally understand what had happened. The man's name was Poon Lim. He had been out there, completely alone, for 4.5 months. And what he did to stay alive during that time is unlike anything you have probably ever heard. Poon Lim grew up on Hainan Island in southern China, the son of a fisherman. The water was never something he feared. It was just where life happened. But by the time he was a young man, the threat of Japanese expansion had reached his family's doorstep. His father, terrified that his sons would be drafted and sent to their deaths, moved the entire family to Malaysia. It was a practical decision, but it planted something in Lim, a restlessness, a need to do something that mattered. That drive led him to volunteer for Britain's merchant navy as a cabin boy. It wasn't glamorous. Sailors of Asian descent were given the worst jobs, paid a fraction of what their counterparts earned, and treated with open contempt by officers who saw them as second class at best. Lim endured it for years before walking away in 1937. He worked as a mechanic in Hong Kong and tried to build something stable, but the world kept closing in. When Japan began threatening Hong Kong in late 1941, he made one more return to the sea, this time as a steward aboard a British cargo ship called the SS Ben Lomond. The Ben Lomond was not a warship. It was a slow, 5,400-ton transport vessel that moved supplies to Allied forces, armed with just enough to look defended without being able to defend itself. On November 23, 1942, the ship was crossing the Atlantic alone on a supply route that German submarines had been actively patrolling for months. In military terms, it was exactly the kind of target U-boat commanders dreamed about. They found it. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a German submarine locked on and fired 2 torpedoes. The attack was over in seconds. The hull split open, and the ship went down so fast that most of the 54 men aboard never had a chance. Poon Lim grabbed a life jacket and cleared the wreckage just before it pulled him under. He treaded water for hours in the open Atlantic, alone, in shock, watching the sky go dark with nothing around him in any direction. Then, just as his body reached its limit, he spotted a raft. It was a standard wooden life raft, 8 feet by 8 feet, that had survived the blast. He pulled himself onto it and sat there, soaking wet, with night closing in. The nearest land was 250 miles south, but the current was pushing him northwest toward the coast of Brazil, more than 500 miles away. He had no way to steer, no way to signal, and no idea whether anyone even knew the Ben Lomond was gone. The raft carried a small survival kit, a flare gun, 2 metal tins, some chocolate, sugar cubes, and an 11-gallon jug of fresh water. Lim started rationing immediately. He caught rainwater during storms. He bent nails into hooks, stripped copper wire from the raft into fishing line, and baited them with crumbled biscuit dough. Within days, he landed his first fish. He ate it raw, used the scraps as bait for the next one, and dried whatever was left in the sun. Week after week, this is how he survived. But the ocean is unpredictable. Storms swept through and washed his dried food overboard. Fish vanished for days at a stretch. The sun burned him from above, while salt water worked into every wound on his skin. Staying conscious at his worst moments took everything he had. When the fish stopped coming entirely, he turned to the seagulls circling the raft. He learned how to approach them slowly, snatch them before they could react, and strip whatever meat he could from the bones. He dragged small sharks aboard and fought them on the slippery planks until he could club them still. Every meal was a fight. But the alternative was worse. What discipline couldn't protect him from were the near rescues, the moments that came closest to breaking him completely. A large cargo ship passed near enough that he could see men standing on the deck. He screamed and waved until he had nothing left. The ship kept going. A US Navy plane spotted him and dropped a marker buoy nearby, what seemed like a promise to return. That night, a storm washed the buoy away. Even a German U-boat surfaced at one point. Its crew looked him over from the deck, then slipped back under without a word. After the plane, he later said, was the closest he came to giving up entirely. And it is hard to argue with that. There is a particular cruelty to hope that arrives and then is taken back, again and again, with no explanation and no apology. What it takes to keep going after that is something most people will never have to find out. But Poon Lim kept going. He kept to his routines, he kept fishing, kept drying meat, kept collecting water. He did the quiet, grinding work of staying alive one day at a time, with no audience and no guarantee. The sign that it was ending came from the water itself. One morning, the deep blue around the raft had turned greenish and murky. He knew that color from childhood. Shallow water, land nearby, a seafloor rising beneath the surface. On April 5th, 1943, he spotted a small boat on the horizon. Hours later, he was aboard it. Poon Lim had been adrift for 133 days, the longest any person had ever survived alone at sea on a raft. He had lost nearly 20 pounds and spent a month in a Brazilian hospital before he could travel. When his story spread, it moved fast. The British government brought him to London, where King George VI awarded him the British Empire Medal. The Royal Navy incorporated his improvised techniques into a new survival manual distributed across the fleet. He settled in Brooklyn after Congress passed a special act to grant him citizenship, and lived there until his death in 1991. When he was told the record might never be broken, he said he hoped it wouldn't be. He had no desire for anyone else to go through what he went through to earn it.